Grupo de Pesquisa da Escola Politécnica da Universidade de São Paulo, tem a honra de promover a palestra Padrão OEA e Documentos Eletrônicos Brasileiros nos Processos de Importação e Exportação. A missão do GAES é aplicar novas tecnologias no dia a dia da sociedade, implementando projetos inovadores com foco na melhoria da qualidade de vida das pessoas e no desenvolvimento do país. Nesse sentido, as palestras que serão aqui ministradas são importantes para difundir o conhecimento e favorecer o debate sobre esses temas tão atuais e relevantes para a nossa sociedade. Convidamos para compor a mesa desse evento o professor Dr. Eduardo Mário Dias, professor titular da Escola Politécnica da Universidade de São Paulo e coordenador-geral do GAESER, o Sr. John Edwin Mann, coordenador executivo do Procomex, o Sr. Lars Carlson, presidente e diretor executivo da KGH Border Services, o Dr. Marcelo Luiz Alves Fernandes, diretor de informações na Secretaria da Fazenda do Estado de São Paulo, e o Dr. Fernando Augusto Pereira Mendes, coordenador-geral do Sistema de Vigilância Agropecuária Internacional da Secretaria de Defesa Agropecuária do Ministério da Agricultura, Pecuária e Abastecimento. Convidamos a todos para a execução do hino nacional brasileiro.
extremamente profícua em termos de esclarecimentos de conceitos do OEA. Né? Então, eu agradeço a presença de todos e, sem muita perda de tempo, já passo a palavra ao doutor John Procurax, que vai introduzir o palestrante.
Obrigado, professor Eduardo. Bom dia a todos. É uma honra poder participar deste evento, a convite do professor Eduardo, de poder trazer o nosso amigo Lars Carlson, que é o idealizador do primeiro programa de OEA no mundo, que é o Stairway na Suécia, que é ex-subsecretário da aduana da Suécia, que é ex-diretor da Organização Mundial das Aduanas e está no Brasil para um trabalho através de um convênio que o Propamex tem com a Receita Federal para ajudar a equipe do OEA brasileira no desenvolvimento do programa. E hoje, inclusive, iremos trabalhar com a equipe do Ministério da Agricultura, tentando ajudar no desenvolvimento do programa de OEA integrado, que é o OEA onde você tem não só empresas que se certificam junto à Receita Federal, mas também a outros órgãos de governo, nesse caso específico, o Ministério da Agricultura. Vocês não vieram aqui para me ouvir, vieram para ouvir o Lars. Então, sem mais delonga, I'm going to ask Lars to take the podium and make his presentation. Nós vamos certificar aqui. Perdão, desculpa. Lars, I think everybody's going to say a few words. I broke the protocol. I'm sorry. Então,
com a palavra, então, o Dr. Fernando Augusto Pereira Mendes, coordenador-geral do Sistema de Vigilância Agropecuária Internacional da Secretaria de Defesa Agropecuária do Ministério de Agricultura, Pecuária e Abastecimento.
Professor Eduardo, colega John, Lars, colega da Secretaria da Fazenda, gostaria de agradecer o convite por poder estar participando. Por parte do Ministério da Agricultura, a Coordenação Geral de Vigilância Agropecuária é a estrutura que está presente em todos os portos, aeroportos e unidades de fronteira e tem a responsabilidade de zelar pelas condições sanitárias e fitossanitárias do país. Então, todo e qualquer trânsito internacional de produtos, materiais, bens que sejam de interesse agropecuário são subordinados ao controle do Ministério da Agricultura. Trata-se de um universo aí de mais de 1 milhão de fiscalizações realizadas por ano, com uma interface, um impacto em torno de 100 bilhões de dólares anualmente. É um universo de produtos do setor agropecuário que são importados e exportados anualmente. E na medida em que existe uma interferência do Estado nesse fluxo de bens e mercadorias, apesar de ele ser necessário, de ele ser importante, a gente precisa sempre ter o cuidado de fazer isso com o menor desgaste, o menor impacto econômico ao setor produtivo. E a iniciativa do operador econômico autorizado, que é o objeto da discussão de hoje, é uma iniciativa mundial e muito bem sucedida nesse sentido, na medida em que representa uma nova forma de fiscalizar, uma nova forma de atuar nos controles do Estado, nos controles estatais. Então, em dezembro do ano passado, muito recente, 3 meses atrás, a Secretaria da Receita Federal assinou uma portaria conjunta com o Ministério da Agricultura, no sentido de, durante o ano de 2017, iniciar esse trabalho conjunto entre as duas pastas. Ontem tivemos uma reunião inicial com o setor da carne, uma área extremamente bem sucedida no país, em termos de tecnologia, de eficiência, de qualidade de controle, e que hoje representa um volume de exportação em torno de 15 bilhões de dólares, 14 bilhões de dólares. Então vai ser um nosso projeto piloto vai ser desenvolvido com a indústria da carne, exportação de cortes de frango, de suínos e carne bovina. Hoje, grande parte desse volume utiliza os portos do sul e sudeste, com destaque para Itajaí, para Paranaguá e Santos. Então, esse projeto piloto deve iniciar com pelo menos 1 ou 2 empresas e utilizando a estrutura portuária dessas 3 unidades aí de Santa Catarina, Paraná e São Paulo, no sentido de testar os nossos procedimentos e para que no ano de 2018 isso possa se estender para todas as cadeias do agronegócio. Então, acho que hoje vai ser uma oportunidade muito interessante para amadurecer o entendimento do programa OEA e como isso pode contribuir para o desenvolvimento econômico e social do nosso país. Então, acho que oportunidade ímpar. Agradecer à USP e ao Procomex por promover esse debate.
Com a palavra, por fim, o Dr. Marcelo Luiz Alves Fernandes, diretor de informações na Secretaria da Fazenda do Estado de São Paulo.
Bom dia a todos. Gostaria de começar agradecendo ao Ézio, ao professor Eduardo pelo convite. A Secretaria da Fazenda não trabalha diretamente com importação, não trabalha diretamente com exportação, mas a Secretaria da Fazenda, e não só de São Paulo, mas de todo o país, vem trabalhando nos últimos 10 anos num componente tecnológico que certamente vai afetar ou contribuir ou colaborar com o processo de importação e outros processos do país. Aí nós estamos falando dos documentos fiscais eletrônicos. O componente, esse produto, documentos eletrônicos, ele se prestou no primeiro momento para a parte tributária, como ainda hoje ela se presta basicamente para a parte tributária, só que ela traz um potencial de utilização para outras áreas que não tributárias imensa. E é um pouquinho disso que eu vou procurar mostrar para os senhores o que existe hoje na documentação e como que ela pode ser utilizada para outros setores.
Solicitamos aos integrantes da mesa que retornem aos seus lugares no auditório para iniciarmos as palestras. Para a palestra, a importância dos programas OEA no desenvolvimento do comércio internacional, convidamos o presidente e diretor executivo do KGH Border Service, Sr. Lars Carlson. O Dr. John já fez a apresentação do Sr. Lars, mas eu posso refazer. Lars Carlson é presidente dos serviços de fronteira da KGH, vice-presidente do grupo KGH e é um dos mais conhecidos líderes aduaneiros e especialistas em facilitação de comércio no mundo e tem uma extensa experiência em alfândega e política de comércio internacional. Foi o primeiro diretor eleito de capacitação na Organização Mundial das Alfândegas, OMA, em 2005 a 2010 e anteriormente era o diretor-geral adjunto da Alfândega Sueca. Ele é o arquiteto por trás do primeiro programa OEA do mundo, o conceito Stairway, e criador do Centro do Futuro de Alfândega Sueca para inovações e análise de tendências e modelos pioneiros como Customless, Paperless e Single Window e One Stop Shop. Por favor.
Bom dia, tudo bem? Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today. And unfortunately, I would have loved to be able and give you the entire speech in Portuguese, but I'm learning still. So I'm going to add Portuguese hopefully soon to my collection of languages. I'm up to 6 for now, but I hope Portuguese to be the 7th or maybe the 1st one day. It's a great honor, privilege to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And it's great specifically because I've always been interested in learning, and I truly live by these words that learning is life and life is about learning. So the idea of exchanging views and ideas and do it in a place like this is absolutely fantastic. And that is why I will have the opportunity is great for me. Oops. This is Korea, 50 years ago. A country that at the time was considered one of the three least developed countries in the world. They had a GDP that was below the lowest in the world, a lot of poverty issues, a big problem. And this is Busan, exactly the spot where it today looks like this. This is Busan 50 years later. And this is what people normally internationally refer to as the development wonder of Korea. Being today the 6th economy in the world, being one of the leading nations related to trade, and that's where the key is. They took a very strong policy on trade and trade development. And we know for a fact that trade development today is probably, or if not the, one of the best ways of develop society, to develop your infrastructure, to develop the people of a nation. And as we can see, it's not even 50 years the wonders of Korea has taken place. It's really the last 20, 25, 30 years. And this is a really interesting example because we should look at what is part of this transformation. Well, one was the trade policies, looking into development as interaction between your own industries and other nations. Another one was actually government, because government was redesigned to support interaction, internationalism, globalization, long before we even had words for it. And Korea Customs, for instance, was ranked maybe somewhere in the middle 30 years ago, 25 years ago. Today they are also ranked among the highest customs administrations in the world. And of course there's a close connection between trade and customs, but also all other agencies working in international trade. This is what the finance minister in 2012, when we had a big conference, the first global conference on what's called authorized economic operators in Seoul. And it was no coincidence that that first conference of the OMA, World Customs Organization, was held in Seoul. And it was interesting to see that the finance minister at the time was very clear what his priorities were. Two things. One, free trade agreements and customs agreements, government agreements between different countries. So it was really about trade policy. It was about customs agreements, again also linking to partnership agencies by the border, and it was information technology. And these are the three topics I will talk about this morning as well, and how they are linked together, how we see them linked together, and how they might look in the future, with the emphasis of how we work to make that happen. So could Korea be Brazil? Could Brazil become Korea? Maybe a bigger version of it? Absolutely. I'm absolutely convinced that Brazil, with all the richness, with all the natural resources, with all the people, with the educational system, could become a leading trading nation on a totally different level than Brazil is today. And of course, it's a development phase where I think Brazil could take leaps in doing this by doing the right things. So again, it's a great honor and great pleasure to be here today addressing you on these topics, and I hope we will have interaction later on as well. So either during the speech today, just raise your hand if there's something you want to know more about, or you can contact me, of course, later as well. I'll not talk too much about myself, it's already been done, but I would like to mention that, as I said, I've been trying to live also by the issue, since again I am at the university in academia. And we started up in World Customs Organization something called the International Network of Customs Universities. And it's really all universities or learning institutions that works with trade development, industry development, customs, government issues are linked, could be linked together for this network. This is one of the things I'm really happy about. But I'm also doing my PhD now on AEO, Authorized Economic Operators, which is a very interesting topic that I will talk more about here today. And I had the honor of just becoming Doctor of Education as well in Australia just a couple of months ago, which was immensely proud to us. So, do we need all of this? Yes, we do. it's very easy. Every morning when we look at our iPhones or iPads or watch the news, we can see that the world is a pretty stormy place. Here is the news of today. It's going to get worse before it gets better. All mega trends is pointing towards the fact that we have a turbulent time ahead of us. And of course, being in Brazil, you've had your share of this over the last years. And hopefully this has now turned and is going the other direction. Because, as you know, there's many who've had different types of crises. We live in the age of globalization. And 15 years ago, we talked about globalization, but we didn't really know what it was. We haven't seen it. And maybe 9/11, the terrorist attacks in New York, was the first really example we saw where a domestic crisis, because it was domestic airplanes flown into domestic buildings, became overnight a problem for the world to solve. We've seen it then after that in many different occasions. The stock exchange and financial markets are interlinked, so if something happens in Tokyo while we're sleeping in Brazil or in the morning, it has impacted us. And it doesn't have to be the big economies, it could be a small economy, something happens and directly we have an impact and effect. And of course we've seen that through the Euro crisis, we've seen it through the global economic financial crisis, 2008, and we're still in that phase. But that again was domestic crisis in the United States, which started with a market in housing and pricing that was really causing a global financial meltdown. So these things happen, but we also now start seeing that there are mega trends going other directions. So there are trends that sometimes are contradictory and sometimes complementary to each other. And of course there's been Euro crisis, and for the moment we see migration crisis in many places. Even I heard in Latin America and in Brazil as well, you had parts of it, but of course Europe has been under a lot of pressure during the last 2 or 3 years. My own country, Sweden, where I come from, has been one of the most open and refugee-friendly countries in the world, still is, but it has also impacted us. So these are things that are going on all along, but there's also another phase of globalization, and some of you might have seen this before. I usually use these pictures and slides to show that there are actually more people with smartphones than access to clean water in the world right now, according to statistics. I don't know if it's good, but it's the way it is. Last year there were 4.5 billion people flying with airplanes in the world. 4.5 billion. That's a big number. And it's going to be more this year, regardless of issues around global warming and pollution and all this problem. It still happens. And of course there was an explosion in internet over the last 5-10 years that nobody could see. Facebook didn't exist 11 years ago. It's one of the biggest companies in the world, connecting almost 2 billion people today in a social network. These are things that happens while we are doing our normal work. We've had some work internationally right now on e-commerce, which is one of the big trends in the world right now, where of course small and medium-sized companies are selling directly to consumers in other parts of the world. This is really what's happening. So the organization I worked a lot of my life for, World Customs Organization, set up a working group to address this issue around postal, courier trafficking, taxing, security for small parcels. Since the group have had its third meeting just 2 weeks ago, e-commerce have grown to 6% globally in 3 meetings, and we are still trying to find our seats in the meeting room. So this is going on while we are working, and we need to find and address these type of issues. And of course my favorite I have to ask is, because again I have a Korean team here. This is the Korean rapper Psy, who did this song Gangnam Style, and don't tell me you haven't seen it, because there's almost now 3 billion people that have watched it on YouTube. At least they have been watched 3 billion times now. So imagine yourself in your companies or where you work or in the university that someone one day came in and said, look, I have a great marketing idea. I'm going to go onto this new thing called internet and I'm going to dance a little bit and sing. And then people will watch it everywhere, and you could put a commercial down there. I only need like, what, 5,000 reais to do it. You would have said, no, it's a crazy person, it would never happen. 3 billion clicks later, I think everybody would have agreed that that would have been a great idea. So of course, the world is changing in many ways around us. And like Steve Jobs said, crisis is good. All real innovation comes from crisis. It's not when we are having good times we are inventing new things. It's actually when we need to do it as human beings. And okay, then we have crisis now, we have a time to do new things. But that's what we're going to do. What about trade? And global trade actually have increased all through this. So even the global financial crisis years, there was an increase of trade. We also see new trade patterns. What used to be somebody exporting, producing something in Brazil, exporting it to somewhere else, Europe, selling it there, it doesn't exist the same way anymore. And I see people in the room who is very much a part of this. Automobile industry, for instance, have been for many, many years. The global value change is changing the way we look at trade. You produce parts of things where it's best to produce, either from quality perspective, price perspective, or any other reason. And we produce it there, we take it in and out, we assemble it somewhere else, we improve the product somewhere in another country, and then we sell it everywhere, not in one place. This, of course, put tremendous pressure on the international trading system and governance, because we are not really organized to work like that. At least we weren't before. So what is customs then? I'm going to start with customs, but I have my friends from agriculture here as well, so we're going to expand it to agriculture a little bit later, so bear with me if you remember. What is customs? Customs is a great idea. Again, thousands of years, somebody came up with the idea that you draw a line on the ground and you say you can't pass without paying. Fantastic idea, isn't it? It's duty collection. And of course it started as local tax around our cities. People walking in had to pay. People taking goods in had to pay. So that's the background, and then it became a little bit larger, local community, region, nations. And of course, it has still stayed on the nation level, even though we still have our taxes, and I know Brazil is world champions of this. Local tax, regional tax, every type of tax. Now, you're in good company with me, because I come from the country that have the highest taxes in the world. People always ask me, so how much income tax do you pay? And I say, well, it's almost more than I earn, actually. But it's something like 60%. Then I have VAT, 25% on that and everything I do, and so on, and house tax and all the other taxes. So people say, wow, how can you live? Well, the good news is that actually you get something back from my taxes. So free healthcare, free education, free university studies, free dental care. Again, so it depends, of course, what you pay for. But that's what customs is. That's how it was developed, one of the oldest professions in the world. But it has, per definition, been local, and the last 100 years national. It's per definition transaction-based. When somebody approaches, somebody has goods, that's when you do the customs business. And of course, for a long period of time, it's been based on paper. So 1,000 years of tradition was, of course, we needed something to collect. So how do you do that? Well, you define a data set. You define the number of pieces of information that you need to do what you're supposed to do, which started with revenue collection. But early on also started becoming other things. There are some things we don't want to share. There are some things we don't want in our countries. There are some things we do not want to leave our country. And all of these things builds on, of course, for the task of actually having a regulation, a regulator that is taking care of the protection, the safety, the security of the nation. So, of course, the Customs Declaration was born very early. What we need to do to move goods across the border. That's basically what the Customs Declaration is. And it's been developed over time, but of course, in itself, it's very interesting to make an example of this. This is, of course, the biggest dream and vision of mankind, moving out to space. And you know we have done that, of course. We all know what happened. John F. Kennedy, again, to take my theme, said, before the end of the decade, we will put man on the moon and bring them back to Earth. Fantastic vision. And they did, of course. Apollo 11 had Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Who was the third one? Anybody knows? We tend to remember number 1 and 2, and number 3, not so good. But Michael Collins was there. He was never on the moon, but he was around the moon. And of course, they came back safe to Earth with this fantastic experience for mankind. You know what happened then, of course? Customs appears. Of course, you have to do customs. You have been outside. You have to declare now. So this is the original customs declaration for Apollo 11. First thing that happened when they took them out of the water, being on the moon, they had a lot to tell. Customs officers are there. What do you have to declare? Moon rocks, aliens, whatever. We want to know. Could be text there. Could be something else we want to protect. So of course, the same purpose was there as well. And hopefully in the future we'll be able to do this electronically if we go to the moon or Mars again, so they can do it on their smartphones up from space. However, the reason we really wanted today, the information and the data collection that government needs, is of course for something else. Is to do all these tasks that we as citizens want government to take care of. Which again is protection. We don't want people to bring in ammunition or parts to a bomb and blow it up in the middle of Sao Paulo. So yeah, we want that stopped. We want to take care of our nature, we want to take care of our fauna, we want to take care of things we have in our country, to not leave, everything from cultural pieces to, of course, the nature itself. And again, we want to also regulate our industries. So of course, the real thing to do it is that for a long, long period of time, for hundreds of years, everything was controlled. 100% was inspected and controlled. I know in Brazil it sometimes still is. And it's not only Brazil, it's many countries. But what has happened over the last 30 years is that also government has started working on risk management-based theories. And all of you know what risk management is because we have it in our companies, in our universities, in our organization, in our homes. We do risk management, all of us, more or less systematic. But government today, and specifically I think those who work with international affairs, are doing a lot of risk management. And of course, in itself, it's about finding and detecting risks, because risks themselves is not a problem. People think risks are a problem. It's not a problem if you know about them. The problem is if you do not know about the risks. So if you know the risks, the theory, of course, is that, again, you treat it. You do something about it. You eliminate it, you accept it, you monitor it, or you manage it. That's what risk management is. Knowing where the risks are. The second part of it is, of course, management. Like it says, we cannot control 100% anymore on anything. We should not control everything 100% because it's just not good business. It takes too much resources, too much time, too much focus. And now to my first point here is that it's also better not to control 100%. Reason being, if you have good risk management, you check the right things, not the things that have low risk. You check the high risks. And of course, that's a resource issue, but it's also a motivational issue for those who are doing checks and controls. If you know that there's a high likelihood that something might be wrong because there's a high risk, then you're more motivated, you do a better job, you control better, results are better. On the other hand, it's also important to, again, identify low risks. What do we do about them? Well, since 10 years ago, we started working with something called compliance management, meaning if you're not a high risk, so we don't have to control the transaction you have, we should instead make sure that the one who has the low risks should be able to control them themselves. So government do not have to raise tax to pay for controlling low risks. We should use those resources to high risks, to things we really want not to happen. So compliance management has been around. I worked a lot with this over the last 20 years. A lot of universities, a lot of researchers working with compliance management. And it's really about making sure that the rules and regulations we have are obeyed to as much as possible, it's possible to do, to as low cost as possible. So the idea is to do it as good as possible to as low cost as possible. Of course, to do both risk management and compliance management, we need data. We need information to determine if something is a high risk or a low risk. It should be targeted for controls, or if it should be self-assessed by the ones who have the low risk. And of course, one of the problems that appeared then was papers. You know, if we started collecting all of these papers in the world, there was a lot of paper. And of course, it's very difficult, as all of you know today, to process paper. So of course we tried to computerize. Again, we were lucky because innovation made technology come along a couple of decades ago. It's not that long ago actually the first email was sent. We almost don't remember it anymore, but it's just 20, 25 years ago. So of course the first computers were there, and as you probably know, there's more computer in this one than the computers NASA had for Apollo 11. So of course development has taken us somewhere. And the first attempts to computerize these huge amounts of data for import and export for customs and other agencies was not so successful either. This was what happened. And we can't have that in our offices anymore. This was the 80s. It was not me on the video, by the way. It looks like me, but it's not me. It was somebody from the revenue agency, not customs, of course. So we, not everybody. You didn't have computers at the time. Anyway, so we decided we would try to do something different. Land the plane upside down, do it differently. So how can you then do it differently? Well, it was really these three things, and Sweden, I was lucky to be in a part of coming out from university and started working on IT projects myself in Swedish Customs. There had been 2 attempts to computerize government and customs at the time. Both failed, and then we started a new one, and I was lucky to be a part of that one. But we had a good team, and the time was right. The Swedish government did a lot of infrastructure support, and the 3 innovations that actually came out of Sweden and Scandinavia at the time are the basics for the modern ways we are working in international standard right now. And it was more a timing issue, and also a strategy from government, just like Korean government had a strategy for trade, Swedish government had a strategy for government reform. And it had to do again with our high taxes, to be fair. Taxes were so high we couldn't raise them anymore. So you need to do something else. If you want to do more, you need to become more efficient. So the cost efficiency parameter was driving Swedish government, and they started with customs because Sweden is the most export-dependent country in Europe. And we live from our exports. We see a lot of Swedish companies everywhere, including Brazil. There's 285 something Swedish international companies just here in Sao Paulo. So of course, what we started to do was paperless customs. We computerized our processes, did the business process re-engineering, didn't computerize the old processes, but new ones, and went to 99.8% paperless. And when I say paperless, it is paperless. It's all papers. So it's not only the customs declaration that goes electronic, but also supplementary documentation, like invoices or bills of loading and all the other documents related to trade. So of course that was important. We at the time had an electronic signature in place. Before that was an international standard. We used EDI before EDI was an international standard, and was lucky or a part of creating that international standard. Could have been another, we would have been lost, but by being early, you can also have an impact on international standards. The second thing we did was a single window. And I'm mentioning this, and I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about it, because Brazil is doing a single window right now. That's not a coincidence either. And it's very much linked into the authorized economic operator programs. Because the single window idea itself, you have to have electronic processing. If you don't have electronic processing, you cannot have a single window. And a single window is a single window, a national one. There cannot be many single windows. It's not single anymore. But some countries do have a single window for one agency, another single window for another agency, one on local level, another one on national. That's not a single window. Single window is single. The other one is like a greenhouse for bad processing. And the third one, of course, was the authorized economic operator. I'll talk about that just in a couple of minutes. So the single window itself, when we had the electronic processing, the electronic declarations, customs, but not only customs, because we also did what's called a one-stop shop, which means that we only have customs by the border. There's no other agencies there. The other agencies have become back office, expert agencies doing legislation, policy, risk management, all the say, more advanced things, but the inspections are done by the border, by customs, on delegation. So every year when I was head of customs, I met my equivalent in agriculture. We negotiated about risk management and said, we will do this amount of frontline controls for you, you will pay us that much for that. And we did the controls, and of course, if it was ordinary controls that customs officers could do, nothing else happened. We were in charge of the release of goods, so release times was not 2 days or more days, it was 3 minutes. Today it's less than 2 minutes on everything that passes the border through. So again, the single window has a very simple idea. It's really about, as a citizen or as a company, you send one piece of information to government. It doesn't matter if it's for customs, agriculture, tax, military, or anybody else. You send it once, and you send one piece. That's defined by government what should be in that information. Then, of course, you wait, and as soon as possible, hopefully within 3 minutes, or maybe a little bit longer sometimes, you get one answer back from government. That's the idea about the single window. Now, people conceive this as technology, technology-driven projects. It's not. It's all about back office processes. It's about business process re-engineering. How do governments on the backside of this front-end interface to public, to companies, work? So one of the recommendations here for Brazil, who is in the middle of this, is actually looking very much, and that is happening, and I know that Procomex and John Mino is here, is supporting and being part of developing that. It's about the processes themselves. How do you actually make that one answer come back as quick as possible, as safe as possible, as cheap as possible, so government can use their resources to, again, high risks and things we want to control and do other things with. Which brings me to the Authorized Economic Operator Program, and as was said in the introduction, this is the first one. This is actually the original drawing from when we first time put it on a whiteboard in 1998, just close to where I live in Sweden. So the idea was the following. If we know what is high risk and if we know what is low risk, we know what to do with the high risk. We're going to inspect it, we're going to control it, we're going to audit it. What do we do with the rest? What do we do with the low risk? Well, we would like it to be as good as possible, high quality, good compliance rates, tax should be paid, but that is something the low risk operator should be able to do on their own. If they have the right information, the right knowledge and competence, the right systems in place, then they should be able to do it. And then we should not intervene. We should not spend government resources on those who are low risk and compliant. So it's about establishing a level of compliance that is acceptable. This is the way, these are the basic criteria for what you can expect a company or a citizen to do. That's the idea behind it. And if they do that, they should also have a different treatment. They should be processed differently. Quicker, easier, facilitated, simpler, lower cost. That's reasonable for taking the responsibility of doing own self-assessment, setting right systems in place, having the right competence in place. So these are the basic principles of authorized economic operators. It's a voluntary partnership program. You never force somebody to be your partner. Well, there are people who try, but it doesn't work very well. So again, you need to agree. We agree to do this. There's an agreement and there's some responsibilities on both sides, not only on the private sector side or the citizen side. And it's about going from transactions to system controls. As I told you in the beginning, in the past, up until this moment in time, around the year 2000, everything was transaction-based and transaction controlled. Now we're saying, let's look at the systems that produces these transactions. The knowledge behind them, the competence, the processes, the routines, the systems, the IT systems, the technology, all of these things. If we can, with reasonable doubt, verify, validate that these systems are in place according to what we agreed on as the reasonable level of compliance, they should be treated as trusted traders and significantly authorized economic operators should be able to be certified as being low risk and compliant. So it's a compliance management concept based on the theories I talked about before that World Bank and many other researchers all around the world is doing. So again, it's about, in different ways, making sure that the compliance level is at an acceptable rate and then goes up, not down. So it's not a one-time control, it's a starting point, a partnership, and then a monitoring and management together of the process that is there. That is a common process. It's import or export. Is it something that a company does together with a partner on the other side somewhere who's buying the goods or selling the goods? And government is in the middle of it, ensuring that some things is happening that we have agreed on in legislation and in routines. So it's a new, smarter control model. And what I mean by that is that transaction controls are, per definition, we have hundreds of years of experience of it, is not very efficient. So the transaction controls, first of all, you can't, because of the volumes of trade have gone up so high, do transaction controls on everything. So you have to do it on risk. Secondly, when you do it, they're not very efficient. So what we know now from 20 years with AAO programs and compliance management is that everything is better with system-based controls. And I'm not saying some things are better. I say every single key performance indicator goes up if the compliance management model system-based controls are in place. So compliance is higher, controls are lower, costs are lower for both parties, speed goes up. All of these things we want to look at is better if it's done correctly. So it's better controls, cost less, better results. And it produces benefits for trusted traders because, again, if somebody invests, they should also have something back from that. They should not be treated the same way as the one who do not invest, who has high risks. And again, it's not always that high risks are there because you want them to be there. It could be just the nature of the business you're in. The second thing that happened is that this then, over time, became international standard. And again, the World Customs Organization today has an international standard called SAFE, Framework of Standards, since 2005 that we worked on, where AAO, on the chapters there, I led the work on. Also had a second parameter, not only the standards themselves, what is an authorized economic operator program, what are the criteria, approximately and standard-based, and benefits and so forth, but also that they can be recognized. So if you meet the criteria of the WCO, OMA, the World Customs Organization, you can bilaterally, between countries, agree, negotiate, and sign agreements called mutual recognition agreements, meaning that if you are an authorized economic operator in Brazil signs an agreement with Uruguay, then you're also authorized economic operator in Uruguay, and the other way around. And Brazil has done that. You have an authorized economic operator, mutual recognition with Uruguay. So a company that is AAO here, I see one right down here, is also AAO in Uruguay. Now, of course, Uruguay is not the biggest economy of the world. It's a nearby country and you have relations with them. But we are also now negotiating with the United States, which become a little bit bigger of a trade perspective. And of course, the next step will be European Union, India, China, Korea, and so forth, other countries. And of course, then, with these mutual recognitions, we can secure all partners in that supply chain. I'll get back to that. So it's really about taking a choice. It's two tracks. This is very interesting from a research perspective because legislation, per definition, should be neutral. It is a founding principles of legislation is they should all be treated the same way according to law. So how can we then treat people differently? Well, this is about not the legislation itself. The same legislation is valid. It's just how do you apply it? How do you make sure that you are in line with the legislation? So it's about how the agencies are treating the risks involved with the legislation. So the legislation is the same. There's no special legislation for those who are authorized. And of course, there are different control models then. There's one control model for those who are not authorized economic operators, and another one for those who are. So the traditional one is risk-based, still inspections, controls, post-clearance audit, looking at bookkeeping, a lot of other things, a lot of inspections. But I will now talk about what is the control model for authorized economic operators. So the idea is, of course, that you apply, You get an application into government, to customs, because customs is the leader and the owner of this international standard. What you do is you tell who you are and if you meet the criteria. There's a first control for basic criteria that you need to have to become one. When you meet those, the next step is really that customs is starting to do what we call pre-validation. You look a little bit at the company. Are there records? Yes. Do you have import-export since before? Yes, of course. How does that look? And then you really start the second phase, which is validation. And that starts always with self-assessment. So the companies, and there are several here in the room, has gone through a process by looking at what is customs interested in doing, in looking at. That's the point. These are the risks we see. How do they apply to you? And it's a standardized set according to the international standard. It varies a little bit from country to country, but it's almost the same everywhere. And all questions in this self-assessment questionnaire that is used, the instrument that is used, is of course not applicable for all companies. So some of them you have to go through and check. And then there's meetings between customs, validation meetings, and the company, going through if you meet the criteria in the validation. And the risk mapping is done. What are the risks in this specific case? If that turns out well, we are agreeing on risks. Company says this I can control, customs look at what they can control, that validation can then be granted and the company can get the status of authorized economic operator, a certificate, an accreditation certificate from government, in that case customs. That's of course is a big step, the company is now trusted trader. However, this is not the end, this is the starting point of that partnership. So what happens on the customs side is that they do an individual control plan for this company. That is different from the other control plan I showed before, from that one for those who are not AEO. So it's about doing controls that is not intrusive, that is not stopping goods by the border, that can be done before and after rather than during the logistic supply chain movement of the goods, which of course makes it faster and more predictable, which is what everybody working with import and export needs and wants. So this is the idea, and that control plan is always there. It's in the behind, and the company gets a, in some countries called key account manager. In other countries, national contact point. One person in customs that is responsible for that company and works together with them to maintain and improve the compliance and not let it go. And typical things that is looked at, again, and I'll mention them again, is again processes, procedures, competence, systems, IT, all of these things that is necessary to produce good transactions. So we don't have to do the transaction-based inspections based on transaction anymore. That's the idea. For that, you would get benefits, because now you can be treated from a control perspective differently, which means that it's about predictability, as I said. Instead of not knowing, sometimes it takes 2 hours, next day it takes 5 days, then it takes 3 days, and then it takes 2 hours again. Very difficult to plan. Costs a lot of money. And instead, you get a predictable window that's going to take maximum this time. That's the idea. Speed, of course, is always interesting. We always want, when it's predictable, we always want it to be fast. But also cost relations. Many countries, we have seen reductions in costs for companies with up to 40 or 50%. By being an authorized economic operator. Because there's a cost investment to actually, again, become one. Then you also need to get, savings back. And normally they don't come directly, unfortunately. They come all the time. But it's starting to happen also in Brazil, and let's get back to that. And of course service, again, you have one person to call instead of calling somebody in the locally, somebody in the port, next time somebody in the airport. They have never talked to each other, they don't know your company. So the idea is again to have a corporate 360-degree view around the company. And hopefully this happens. This is the normal scenario. Here comes the AEO company. And nobody wants to be that cheetah. Now this system of AEO has also become international law because 6 weeks ago, yesterday, World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement the so-called Bali package, was entered into force. And that was the first multilateral trade agreement in 30 years. And one of the keystones of this is authorized economic operators. So all 162 countries of the WTO now has to have an AEO program, which means also that the connections of bilateral agreements between these countries will be more and better in the future, obviously. Brazil has, of course, signed the WTO. You are also, by Roberto Azevedo, leading the World Trade Organization for the moment. So these are the statistics of AEO. There's now almost 44,000 companies that are AEO around the world. There are 73, this is the last official statistics, by the way, 73 countries who have AEO programs. There's 28 mutual recognition agreements. 43 mutual recognition agreements. There's 28 countries more under the process of developing and implementing programs. And there's 25 new mutual recognition agreements. I know at least 20 more mutual recognition agreements that is under negotiations right now that have not been reported to international, to WCO yet. So this is happening while we are here. So what about Brazil? Well, as you heard, one of the reasons I know we talk about it is, of course, that Brazil now have an authorized economic operator program since really 2.5 years ago. And it started with the first phase for export, then a compliance phase for import, and also compliance for export. And we are now in the third phase, which I will speak a little bit about now, and also why we have the agriculture here. So it's interesting with the Brazil program that it's the best in the world. You are now world leaders. You are ranked #1 in football, as leaders as well. I just saw it from the FIFA ranking. But you are also ranked #1 on AEO. And one of the reasons being that Brazil was a little bit slow starter here, because you had other programs and so forth. So it was a good moment to do it now, because your program is one of the most modern in the world. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's modern. So it has facilities that many of those who did it 10 years ago do not have yet. So the European Union system, the CT-PAT in the US and so forth, they are old systems now, legacy systems, that is underway of being rebuilt to become more close to what Brazil has. So this is a system fully in line with international standards and best practices. It has both compliance and securities. It involves all stakeholders, so it means you can become an AEO as an importer, exporter, transporter, logistic company, port operator, airport operator, broker. All of these parts of the supply chain has an opportunity to apply for becoming an AEO. And the way it works is that those who are doing it as importers and exporters, they have secured their processes, their premises, their specific requirements. So they start saying, I would like to work with other AEO companies. So, if I do a subcontracting with a transporter, I would like to have an AEO transporter, because they know what AEO is. So they will not endanger my certification with government. And the transporter then start working with a broker or with a port operator that is also AEO. That's how it works in most of the countries. So you become a part of a secure supply chain that is at least secure, more secure than the non-secure supply chain. We also have a national mutual recognition model. There's negotiations going on with the US, started up with China as well. So these are now countries that will be linked to the Brazilian system, meaning that we will have access later this year as an AEO to the US market without having to be CT-PAT or AEO there, which means less inspections, again, smarter movement at the border in the US as well and so forth. And the other way around, of course. Solid processes and good benefit package. Could always be more benefits. There's work going on and more benefits. The next one for the Receita Federal will be the pre-release of goods, which is a very big one internationally. That it's possible to know before the goods is here that it's cleared, which means that, again, the release of goods and the speed will be speeded up. Which brings me to the really good news, the really good story of today, which is that today, or really this year, starting in December last year, Receita Federal started working with a number of other agencies to develop integrated AEO, what we internationally call single government AEO status. And what that is really what everybody from the beginning when we started doing authorized economic operators wanted. Meaning, just like the single window do for information, you send one piece of information in and get one piece of information out, you should do the same with certification and accreditation. If Receita Federal has gone through a validation process with a company, checked liability, checked compliance records, checked financial records, checked the IT system, it's reasonable that that trusted trader status should also be trusted by other government agencies. All government agencies involved in import and export. And this is the idea, that you would get one application, you would get one certification process where the different agencies validate their requirements. And at the end of the day, you get one certificate, basically a joint certificate from government, from those agencies that are involved. And it started with agriculture. There's work ongoing. We will continue to work after this presentation here today on the agriculture one. There's very good progress there, very positive in many ways. And secondly, also on visa, health is the next step. They've been involved in the project so far. And there's been now negotiations starting, discussions with other agencies as well. So the model itself will be one application through the single window. The system is almost ready. It will be ready in a couple of months' time. Again, the information then will be, you can make a choice if you also want your certification to be for more than one agency. So if it's not only, say, Receita Federal, Customs, you also want maybe agriculture because you have products or issues or some inspections that is there, you can apply for that as well. And when that is done, again, there will be information through the single window also going to agriculture. And they start their process of criteria, validation, certification. And at the end of the day, there will be one certification process. This is first in the world. Never happened before. There are countries who have bits and pieces, parts of it, but this is again taking Brazil to the top of the implementation league. And it means that you can get, when you get mutual recognition agreements with other countries, they also have these type of things, and you can connect the two and get a very fast, secure process, and it increases exports. There's no doubt it does that. It also it makes imports, again, more cost efficient, obviously. So what are the trends, very finally, around what's happening in other places? Of course, information technology is developing very much more faster. And again, remember, we now have 2 tracks. So there will be solutions with technology, go only for those who are authorized economic operators, that can be more advanced. And for those who still are not, have chosen to go through the more traditional process. So of course we look into these things like everybody else does. How can we use cloud computing and big data in the issue of international trade, international customs? As examples, I'll give you 3 examples. One is the Green Corridor. This is already existing. And it means that voluntary for AEOs, the export data is sent to all the places of the supply chain. So it will be available at the border station when they leave the country. It will be available at the border station where import is done, all through to the place where the goods is delivered. And by that data being available, you can get fast tracks by the border or through the ports and airports. Just like you are normally flying with LATAM or TAM or any other airline, there are different queues. And this is a different queue, it's called the Green Corridor. It exists as an example here between, it was Sweden, Finland and Russia. So it's quicker to go through Russia. It takes 2 days for a truck to stay by the border, the Russian border, but these goes through in less than 5 minutes. Because the information is known all through the supply chain. And this is to the other side of Sweden. This is a Gateway Sweden. There you don't even stop at the border, because if you're an authorized economic operator, both sides, all parts of the chain, transporter, logistic company, broker, exporter, importer, if that chain is intact, you have already pre-described that you're going to pass the border in a specific moment. And when you pass the border, your mobile phone, which is pre-designated to the driver, just clicks, just like you go through a road toll. Bing, now the declaration is handled and it's with everybody, it's clear, and you don't even stop by the border anymore for AEOs. The third example is one we are working on right now, and here's Dubai and the big hubs of the world for goods involved. And this is related to cloud computing, and we have an IT team here as well with people from the IT side. And what happening here is the idea again, like export data and the risk management done, for instance, in this case, Korea, there's the Korean theme again, is uploaded to a cloud solution. So it's really available on internet for those who are connected to that specific thing. So if there's a mutual recognition agreement, which there is now between UAE, Dubai, for instance, and Korea, they have access already from the moment export is done in Korea. They can start do the risk management, monitoring the process, and again, all through the supply chain, through the shipping agencies, through the ports, these have priority. These transports have priority. They are loaded highest up in the ship. They are going through the this is a test that is just started up right now. That's a much bigger than 2 border stations, so 2 countries on each side, Uruguay and Brazil, or Sweden and Norway, and so forth. So this is what's going to be the international standard in the future. Adding on to one layer more on big data, going back to my magic customs declaration at the end here. This is a project that we are working on together with the United States, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And what it's really about is that customs then have said, and we got agencies, including agriculture, involved, that if we have an AO that is electronically advanced and have a branch system, some kind of industry standard that follows the supply chain anyway, it could be automobile industry knowing exactly where something is at a specific time, chemical industries that there are sensitive products or groceries or whatever it is, that they have control through the supply chain for, then we use that system instead, and then we don't need any customs declarations anymore. So what will happen with these super AOs, they will be like one elevated level above the ordinary AOs if you have those systems in place. You will basically, this is interesting, once a month pay your duty. You calculate it yourself. You will go and come whenever you want, and customs and government agencies who have access to your real data, not to produce customs data or agricultural data anymore, but the commercial data between importer and exporter, voluntarily put in the cloud for all agencies to look for, to take statistics from, or do whatever they want with from control perspective. Then you have a free passage back and forth. And of course there are other control systems in place. So it's going to be better controlled than the system we have today with customs declarations. That looks like that could be science fiction, but it's done right now between Australia and New Zealand in the test. So then the customs declaration disappears. It's on Copacabana. The declaration is sitting in a beach chair and drinking, maybe even smoking something. I don't know. Anyway, you know, we don't need a customs declaration anymore because there is information, there is a payment flow, and there is control. So, of course, I have to end with football. Sorry, I'm 5 minutes away from ending now, boring you out with question. But I'm a great football fan. I love to be in Brazil. I love Brazil overall. Again, as I said, you have a good team coming again. That's going to be great. That's my Pelé shirt, by the way. Former Director General of Customs as well, giving me this Bahia shirt. Don't wear it too often, but, you know. My team is Vasco da Gama, by the way. So, anyway, I'll give you 2 advice on this, because what I really talked about is partnership between government and trade, and also citizens, because it could equally be, in Australia we do this for immigration, for instance. People, visas going in and out of the country. So it's the same principle. 2 things need to be taken into account, because technology is not a problem anymore. We are the first generation who can transform problems into possibilities through internet, through technology, through new solutions. That's not the problem anymore. We can do anything with technology. Culture is something different. Change management of the ways we think, the way we work, the way people are much more difficult. And I take a football example. This is Felipe Melo. You might remember a Football World Cup when he took a red card against Netherlands when you were leading 2-1, quarterfinals in South Africa 2010. And I just noted that he was not very popular in Brazil, let's put it that way, because you lost the game and got out of the World Cup at the time. So a lot of people said you're not allowed home, stay in Italy, and you know, I don't want you. This is another example. This is a final in 2006 between Italy and France in Football World Cup. You know what happened, of course. Zinedine Zidane, best player of the tournament, best player of that game, scored the first goal. They were about to win. Then he headbutted the Italian guy, Marco Materazzi, and he walked by the World Cup and they lost it on the penalty Zidane should have scored on. The 5th penalty they missed, and that was Zidane's penalty. What happened with him in France, you think? He got a statue in Lyon, 5 meters tall. And all French friends I have, I live in France part of the year, says, yeah, okay, it was Italian. Yeah, he should. There was no problem with that. We lost the World Cup, but, he said some bad things. So, that's the way it is. So culture is different in different countries, and it's difficult to change. And the last part of it, of course, about innovation is about us as people. Because it's all about people at the end. As Albert Einstein once said, innovation is more important than knowledge. Even though we are in the house of knowledge right now, innovation still needs to be there. And I found this in Tajikistan. Why hasn't Honda a car like that? It works. It's all about innovation. My final and last words will be about learning, because I started with learning, so I'm going to end with learning. This is a true story. It's about a teacher, a female teacher who had a boy student who was very good, but very annoying. Because he kept asking questions all along. He came every 5 minutes asking new question, new question. And she was a little bit bothered with it because she did not have time for other people. So, other students. So she took an idea, she took up a newspaper and she cut a world map into small pieces, like a puzzle, jigsaw puzzle. She gave it to the boy and said to the boy, yeah, go and do that world map, because they hadn't done geographic yet. So she knew that would take him a week to do that. And it took 5 minutes and he was back with a perfect world map. She asked, this is impossible, how could you possibly do this? And he said, well, I don't know the world, but there was a face of a man on the back side, and when I got the man together, I got the world together. With those words, thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Obrigada pela palestra. Vamos abrir agora para perguntas. Alguém tem alguma pergunta?
Hello. Fantastic presentation. Thanks a lot. I think it was very, very good to have this excitement for our bright future. Anyway, how do you see, in the case of Brazil, we have several challenges, as you know. Ministry of Agriculture has already taken some steps. The process for exporting meat is a very good example. But in the healthcare area, we're still facing at least 30 working days for being serviced the first time by Anvisa in several airports. And these are goods that are coming by air because it was supposed to be urgent. So how do you see the possibility of bringing Anvisa on board with this kind of structure? That's the first question. Second, which is the size of the companies that make adhesion to this kind of program? Are we talking only about large companies, or the medium and small companies that actually make most of the business on a daily basis?
Thank you for thank you for the questions. Well, first of all, I'm very optimistic about the integrated AEO for several reasons. One is that the timing is right to do it in Brazil, even though there are challenges. And the reason being that you have the single window launch in parallel. What we've seen around the world of research, and I'm doing this for my PhD right now, is that if the one or the other it has a legacy problem, it's not there or it's old. you don't get the benefits that you can get. And that's also why I started my presentation with why do we actually collect data? And how do we collect data? Because we don't have the data, we can't do the risk management, we can't do the authorized economic operator program very well. So the single window element here is very important for the potential there. When it comes to agriculture, I know they're already not only aboard, that they will do this and do it very well from the discussions we had so far over the last year almost now. When it comes to Anvisa, they've been on board all along, but as a second pilot or second test agency. What we see right now is two things. One is Receita Federal is now ready with their platform and their program, which means that in my estimation from July you could add on any agency. And hopefully starting then with Anvisa, who's been kind of observers through the work with agriculture. So they're very optimistic and very positive in the discussions we have. They understand the concept. They have taken steps to, you know, how to start thinking about doing the criteria, doing the risk management part. Still some way to go, I think. But I'm optimistic that they will be the second agency, that work will continue. And I think that the Receita Federal's excellent work with doing the platform now, with is again the single window integration platform that is there, makes it possible really with a guideline from Receita Federal, and they're doing a package almost like a kit right now that other agencies will get. How do you do it? Because not to invent the wheel, but work within the platform that is now present as the most modern one in Brazil. So the answer is yes, I think you will get Anvisa soon. And I think it will start step by step. I don't think it will be a big bang there, and that shouldn't be. It's much better to find low-hanging fruit, industries that has a specific issue that suits well with a new methodology. And when that comes along, you test it and you do scale testing, and it works well, you scale it up. And that's how I see it being implemented. But of course, for Brazil, it is about agriculture, and it is about health. These are the two that need to be joined up to get a good processing for an export. Your second question, there's a misunderstanding around authorized economic operators that it's only for big companies or multilaterals. My experience from 20 years is exactly the opposite, actually. It's much more difficult to certify a big company, a multinational, with all these complex systems in place, with many sites, with different types of processing, subsidiaries, different companies. But of course, they have the resources and have the experience from other countries often and so forth to do it. So it's getting easier and easier to do it. And I gotta say that another big news that's coming this summer in this respect is that Receita Federal has now learned from a year and a half of the process, and it's launching a new process to become certified. So what was an audit, very like the Blue Line audit before, is going to be a validation that is very much in line with international standards, in my view. And I'm very positive to that one. So that will take maybe instead of 6 months, it will take 2 months to become. And of course that helps everybody, but specifically small and medium-sized companies. A small company, I know many small companies who join, it's much easier. There's not many people working, there's one set of IT system, it's easy to certify. For them the issue is to get involved, to have time to get involved, to the cost that is involved in doing some of these things. But again, the cost is much higher for a big company. So one of the project plans from Receita Federal is to do a specific stepping, which the first AEO program Stairway had for small and medium-sized companies. So you basically could get in on a lower level, not getting all access to all benefits, but to some benefits with a much lower cost. And when you get more transactions because you get more exports, one day you come to a point where you say, okay, now I'm ready to go to the next step and invest a little bit more to get more benefits out of it. And I think that that is the right way to go. Those countries who have a structure of a small and medium-sized company, which is the most export-oriented countries in the world, have done that. A specific step in pre-validation period for small and medium-sized companies. So that have been my recommendation to Brazil as well.
My name is Marcus Kama. Congratulations, Lars, for joining us with your excellent experience. We have been learning with you since your first visit, maybe 4 years ago, I don't know, more. My question, regardless, we have Mr. Trump head on our most always desired trade country, partner. What's your opinion about the MRA, mutual recognition, to be signed with them? And how does it take long to get results, real results, after signing that? Thank you for your question.
And I think it was the United States specifically you thought you were making reference to. I heard the president's name mentioned there. Luckily, Mr. Trump hasn't really reached down to a first economic operator on his agenda yet. So I think that, to be fair, there's an ongoing process with U.S. Customs and Border Protection that has a very strong strategy on mutual recognition. They want mutual recognition with other countries. In fact, they were here before the Brazil program was even started and wanted to negotiate with the Receita Federal. And I recommended not to start doing that, because my reason for that was that negotiations are negotiations. There's a standard, but there are also learning processes. So, because the United States has done it 10 times before, they know how to do it and to maximize the gains from the United States. So they come, which they also did, which I told Receita Federal, they will come and they will place a paper in front of you saying, yeah, here is the mutual recognition, please sign. And my recommendation was that don't do that. You don't have to do that. You're going to do a template together with us that is Brazil's template. You put that template beside the American template and say, that's a very nice document, but we have this document. Similar, but a little bit different. And then you negotiate. And that's exactly what Receita Federal did, and the US was a little bit confused about that. Because they were normally used to countries just signing like that. And they can do that with a small country, but you're Brazil. There's no reason why you don't negotiate good for Brazil. So long story short is that that period was started very early, going very well. There's been site visits on both sides, and they're coming here in May, I think, again, in the United States. And there's a good cooperation. I'm very optimistic that that will be signed. Now, I'm speaking as a private person, not representing anybody, neither Brazil, Receita Federal, US, but this year, for sure. It would be my timetable for that. When does it start working? In tradition, there's been two answers to that question. When old systems that was not so modern as Brazil's one were signed in between each other. So if you, for instance, like US, they only have security and export. That's good enough, but it's not the same level of system as you have. When that is signed, you can only sign on benefits on that type of arrangement. But what we recommended Brazil to do was to say, you write in the agreement that the moment they get import benefits, the moment they get agriculture involved, then we should immediately link that to not start negotiating again, but it should immediately be involved in the negotiation. And that is what has happened. So, of course, depending on the old systems that didn't have many benefits, if two systems with little benefits are going together, there's not that much new benefits, more than the side that you are acknowledged. That goes pretty quickly. So the first type of acknowledgement that you get less controls in the US, for instance, for exports from Brazil, that's immediately, it goes directly. So in their systems, you will be identified as an AO in Brazil, and that will automatically release less controls in the American system. For other countries, when you're signing with somebody, Europe for instance, or China, who has benefits like you have, import benefits as well, it takes a little bit longer to get them implemented, is the experience. But if you would negotiate with Australia, for instance, which I know is not a big trading partner, but has a system that is very similar to yours, that would be giving import benefits very quickly and very good benefits. So it's also depending on the two systems. They might both be a part of the international system, but they might be on benefits at different levels. That has an impact on how the benefits are implemented. But in the mutual recognition, after operationalize it, there's a period where you actually monitor this. So there will be meetings like every 3 months or something between Brazil and the US to make sure that your companies get the benefit. And there they will do the same. They will make sure the American companies have the benefits in Brazil. But it will be the same level of benefits on both sides. So it goes pretty quickly, and with the new systems, it's pretty good. That's the summary of it.
Larry, good morning.
Good morning.
For the good information that you sent for us. My name is Paulo Costa. I'm from IATA, the International Air Transport Association. As you know, we have a lot of programs that we developed together with WCO, ICAO, and IATA. One of them, it's not, it runs in parallel, is security freight. I believe you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Do you see any problem in make the mutual recognition? We are trying to, we fight here for more security. The mindset of the airlines is much more in security side, not in the tax collection or other things. And we are striving with Receita Federal here in Brazil because we have this program, and ANAC has a program set up. Do you see any problem in this mutual recognition? Thank you.
No, I'm very well aware of these programs, and the good thing that you're mentioning as well is that on the international level there's very much cooperation on these. There's MOU signed by the organizations you represent, and as you said, WCO. It's acknowledging the WTO agreement now that these systems need to be harmonized between the international organizations. So from a functional perspective, no, I don't see any problems with these different security systems for different. You have ISPS for ports and sea cargo, which is similar structure that is already there. The way it should work is that these branch-related security programs should be the basis. What you put on as national AO programs should be on top of that. You shouldn't repeat, you shouldn't duplicate, obviously. So the idea is that if a port, for instance, is ISPS, an airport is related to the security systems on air cargo and air aviation, or a company is, and so forth, that should be acknowledged. So it should be a shorter period to become an AO for customs and agriculture and others if these systems are in place. In reality, though, you have a point, is that, of course, some of these programs in countries are very security oriented. In fact, it's only security oriented in this case, but also the customs program in the US is up until now, even though they are rebuilding it now, the TPAD, only security. And of course, this is an issue because Brazilian companies are not security oriented. Brazilian society, or my country, Sweden, is not either priority security. We have a lot of other priorities. And of course, the mindset is different. And it takes time. It's about the change management I talked about is a part of this. That the issues is that you need to find ways of educating, combining security into the society in different ways. What I have found in Brazil that is different from many of the other countries, and I've been to 164 or something now countries, and seen AO everywhere around the world, is that there's a safety thinking in Brazil that some other countries, unfortunately I gotta say, because you have a safety problem. Theft, criminality, these type of things. So port operators, terminal operators, logistic companies, aviation companies are aware of the safety issue and addressing it. And what we found with working with terminal operators on both air and ports is that it's easier if you have a safety mentality to change it into anti-terrorism security or that type of security, because it's just really, instead of people picking things out of the cargo, you should also make sure they don't put things in. And it's a little bit about mentality, training, education, from a more soft perspective than you're asking, that I see as a challenge and a problem when these systems are in place. But from a technical point of view, the agreements is not a problem at all, I see. It's complementary of each other. Yes. I think I have stolen time from people here. Thank you very much. I'm available, so you through John Mean or through others. Thank you very much.
Quero agradecer ao Sr. Lars Carlson. As perguntas que ainda tiverem, por favor, encaminhar por e-mail, podem encaminhar também para o grupo do GAES, e nós encaminharemos para as pessoas, para os palestrantes cabíveis. Para ministrar a palestra Visão Geral de Documentos Eletrônicos no Fisco Brasileiros, descrição dos principais documentos fiscais eletrônicos gerados no país desde 2006, algumas possibilidades de utilização dos mesmos na área tributária e estudos de utilização em outras áreas. Convidamos o diretor de informações na Secretaria de Fazenda do Estado de São Paulo, Dr. Marcelo Luiz Alves Fernandes. Marcelo Luiz Alves Fernandes é agente fiscal de rendas da Secretaria da Fazenda do Estado de São Paulo, graduado em Engenharia Mecânica e em Direito, ambos pela Universidade de São Paulo, especialista em Direito Tributário pela Escola Superior da Procuradoria-Geral do Estado de São Paulo e mestre pela Escola Politécnica da Universidade de São Paulo. Que eu apertei o botão.
Agradeço a oportunidade. Bom, o tema que eu vou dissertar é uma apresentação bastante curta. Ela não tem exatamente a ver com os operadores econômicos, objeto da palestra do Dr. Lars. Mas tangencia bastante o tema, porque eu vou falar de fluxo de mercadorias, padrões de troca de informações entre empresas e controle governamental, que foram temas que foram tangenciados na palestra anterior e tema cujo o Brasil ele é pioneiro e tem bastante experiência, bastante sucesso nessa área. O tema que eu vou falar sobre documentos eletrônicos fiscais. Então, num primeiro momento, ele remete à parte tributária. Não vou falar sobre impostos, evidentemente, não vou falar sobre tributos, mas vou abordar muito mais a tecnologia que foi usada na experiência brasileira, a tecnologia essa que certamente poderá ser usada, por exemplo, na experiência aqui na OEA. Começar com a palavra-chave, o Dr. Lars acho que abordou bastante, que é a palavra controle. Então, o objetivo lá em 2006 do fisco brasileiro, de por que passou de uma tecnologia, era o papel, todos os documentos em papéis, para documentos eletrônicos, tudo nesses últimos 10 anos transformou-se de papel para digital, para eletrônico, começa com o mote de controle. Então imagina, por exemplo, aqui um arquivo fiscal de uma empresa. A empresa é obrigada a guardar toda a sua documentação, ela tem custo de armazenamento. Imagina também a fiscalização tendo que analisar cada um desses arquivos para obter então o seu controle, para fazer a sua cobrança. Imagina isso aqui, uma empresa razoavelmente pequena, imagina o espaço que se ocupa com isso, imagina o trabalho que se dá de obter uma informação, de tirar uma informação útil a partir desse arquivo. Difícil, né? Agora imagina daqui. Então o mote é exatamente acabar com o papel e transformar todas essas informações que estão dispersas nessa bagunça toda em arquivos eletrônicos. Para dar uma visão geral de como foi a evolução dos documentos eletrônicos aqui no país, eu busquei fazer isso na forma de uma linha do tempo. Então começa lá em 66, o Código Tributário Nacional, teve legislações esparsas ao longo do tempo. A primeira declaração eletrônica começou em 96 com a Receita Federal, a Declaração de Imposto de Renda. O Simples Nacional surgiu em 2006, o Microempreendedor Individual surgiu em 2008. O SF foi o primeiro documento estruturado, vamos dizer assim, surgiu em 2001. O que é o cupom fiscal? O cupom fiscal é aquele papelzinho amarelo que a gente recebe numa compra, num restaurante, num varejo. Aí começou, então, teve um evento que mexeu com tudo isso. Foi uma medida provisória lá em 2001, ela teve esse número 2200-2. E o que essa medida provisória introduziu no nosso dia a dia, na tecnologia brasileira? Ela introduziu o conceito de certificação digital. Então, ela introduziu uma segurança para que documentos eletrônicos pudessem ser transicionados com validade jurídica. Então, o certificado digital, o emitente consegue assinar com a sua assinatura digital num padrão instituído por essa medida provisória que permite que o destinatário daquele documento, qualquer documento, pudesse então, numa arquitetura nacional, validar aquele documento que foi emitido anteriormente. E essa tecnologia, essa assinatura digital, que permitiu então uma série de documentos que fossem criados aqui no fisco brasileiro. Eu citei alguns que nos interessam mais no tema da OEA. Em 2005, surgiu um documento então denominado Nota Fiscal Eletrônica. O que é a Nota Fiscal Eletrônica? É um documento que substituiu o papel de transações comerciais entre empresas. Então, toda transação de um atacadista, por exemplo, com um distribuidor, de uma indústria com um atacadista, é necessário que seja emitido um documento fiscal, uma nota fiscal. Antes era em papel, e aí passou então a nota fiscal eletrônica. Basicamente, como que ela funciona? A empresa gera um arquivo digital, tem lá umas informações padronizadas que ela precisa inserir, assina digitalmente esse arquivo e transmite para o fisco brasileiro. Então, antes de transmitir para o destinatário da mercadoria, aquele documento é transmitido para o governo brasileiro, que valida, analisa, devolve pela internet, validou, então aí sim a mercadoria ela pode sair do vendedor para o comprador daquela mercadoria. Tudo isso aqui é feito pela internet. Essa transação demora questão de milissegundos, desde do vendedor até o governo brasileiro, do governo brasileiro para o comprador. Em 2007 surgiu um outro documento chamado Conhecimento de Transporte Eletrônico. Também tudo isso aqui, parte tributária, também contém imposto, mas o objetivo desse documento é documentar o transporte dessa mercadoria. Então, a mercadoria já era documentada agora num documento eletrônico, passou, desde 2007, o transporte dessa mercadoria também passou a ser documentado na forma eletrônica, nesse documento chamado Conhecimento de Transporte Eletrônico. Aqui tem, em 2009, surgiu a escrita fiscal, não é muito objeto da palestra, mas em 2010 surgiu um outro documento chamado Manifesto de Documentos Fiscais Eletrônico. Esse aqui não é um documento tributário, é um documento de logística que contém o quê? Contém todos os conhecimentos de transporte eletrônicos, contém todas as notas fiscais eletrônicas que está dentro de um caminhão. Então, esse documento é um documento fundamental de logística, por quê? Porque vincula toda a parte tributária, toda a parte de mercadorias, toda a parte de transporte ao caminhão que está fazendo o transporte daquela mercadoria. Em 2010 também surgiu então documentos para o varejo. Aqui em São Paulo nós substituímos o cupom fiscal em papel por um cupom fiscal eletrônico e mais recentemente, aqui tem um hardware ainda envolvido, e mais recentemente então surgiu a nota do consumidor eletrônica sem hardware envolvido, totalmente eletrônico. Então esses aqui são documentos que o fisco tem adotado desde 2005, paulatinamente tem inserido documentos em cada setor econômico aqui no país. Coloquei em verde outras declarações do fisco da Receita Federal. Então tem a parte contábil, também surgiu em 2007, FConto também a parte contábil, escrita de contribuições sociais e, mais recentemente, outras declarações que o fisco da Receita Federal inseriu na nossa realidade. Veja que, desde 2001 para cá, então, inúmeras declarações, inúmeros documentos eletrônicos surgiram no nosso cenário. É um cenário bastante complexo. O objetivo disso tudo era substituir o papel pela parte eletrônica e aquilo que a gente vê por essa complexidade, eu não acrescentei os documentos municipais, porque isso aqui ia poluir bastante a nossa linha do tempo, mas são inúmeras declarações que existem, inúmeros documentos fiscais, inúmeros livros fiscais, tudo isso para suprir o fisco de informações sobre o fluxo, enfim, de mercadorias. Coloquei aqui